everyone, welcome to Working On It. I'm Dr. A and I'm a clinical psychologist aiming to make your life just a bit more manageable. Remember, the tools and the tidbits that you pick up on this channel are purely educational. They can't replace therapy, but with some practice, they can help you along in your daily life. So let's get started. Today, we are doing part 2 of talking about thoughts and how they affect our functioning, our everyday life. So the first part, we figured out how our thoughts dictate our emotions, dictate our behaviors, that it's not really what happens to us, it's what we think about what happens to us. And so today, it's time for us to start dissecting which of those thoughts are true and which of those thoughts are just harmful stories that our mind made up. Because our mind is bombarding us all day long, every minute, pretty much, with different kinds of thoughts, and not all of them reflect the truth, but we believe all of them. And so we have to figure out, well, which ones are we believing that are not true and which ones are. So we really are talking about a concept today called cognitive distortions or cognitive errors. These are mistakes that our mind makes, glitches, little potholes in thinking that we don't see as mistakes. We just accept them as truth. Why is it important for us to talk about it? Because our mind does a lot of very beautiful things. It lets us fall in love and have families. It lets us build buildings and bridges, right? But it also does very dark things. It gets us to feel hatred toward ourselves or others. It gets us to physically hurt ourselves or others. And in the extreme case, it convinces us that sometimes the only way out is no longer to exist. So we need to know this powerful machine that we have, when this machine is telling us things that are true and when it's just making up things that make us feel horrible. And today I'm going to help you do that. Now, we are talking about our mind making up stories. And before I can tell you about the distortions in particular, because I will, they're so common, these potholes, these glitches, these mistakes, that there's a list of the most common ones that we sort of all engage in with names and definitions and all of that. But before we can get to that, we have to understand what they are in general, which we've talked about a little bit, and what our stories might be. So think of these errors almost like a funhouse mirror image of reality. It looks like you, but it's not you, right? So these glitches and these mistakes that your mind is making look like you could make a case for them, but they're not true. And so we're gonna have to figure out what stories our mind is telling us that make us feel really bad in our life, about ourselves. And the way we're gonna do that is by thinking about what your greatest hits are, as I call them. What are the top 5 stories that you tell yourself over and over and over again to the point where you just believe them to be true? Your mind is just telling you constantly and you're like, yep. Now these could be something like, I'm not attractive enough. If somebody was in my place, they'd do a better job. I'm not fit enough. My body has to look different. All these different stories. I don't know what they are for you, but I'm telling you, everybody has a greatest hits. So go through your day and go through your week and try your best. It's really hard, but try your best to catch the stories that make you feel the worst, that your mind might be convincing you of. Okay, now why do these distortions exist? Well, they exist because our mind is funny enough trying to help us. It's one of those situations where it's actually better if you don't help. It is processing so much information throughout the day that it's trying to take shortcuts, essentially. And we know sometimes when you take shortcuts, it's fine, but sometimes when you take shortcuts, you get in a little bit of trouble. Right? So instead of thinking about the nuances of people, sometimes we might think something like, well, these kind of people are good and these kind of people are bad. Okay, go. That's what our mind does, right? So I will tell you in later videos what some of these shortcuts and what some of these distortions are, but it will have value for you to just take some time until those videos come around to think about your greatest hits. That way, when I get to the list of things and we start to go through it one by one, you can see how much one of your greatest hits, or two, or all of them, might match these distorted ways of thinking, these tricks that your brain has been convincing you of, that you might have believed your whole life, but it's really just this thing that your mind did, this mistake that it made. So write down your greatest hits, and you can write them in the comments if you're feeling brave and vulnerable, because I bet your greatest hits might overlap with a lot of people's. I post videos every Tuesday and Friday now, not Thursday, Friday. So come back and see me in my next video where I'll be talking about how to not suffer. I know you're thinking, well, how are you going to do that? Well, we're going to be talking about the difference between pain and suffering. I'll teach you that next time. In the meantime, practice what we talked about from the last video, part 1, and this video, and write down what your greatest hits are. What are the biggest stories that your mind has been yapping in your ear and convinced you of? Write it down. Like I said, if you want, put it in the comments, and you got this. See you next time.